Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I am very excited to be here and maybe a little nervous too, right? I'm an athlete too, so we know that combination of nervousness and excitement when we are trying to do something, including presenting. So here we go. So, Anthony introduced me. I am a licensed psychologist. I've been in private practice for over 20 years, and I'm very proud to be one of the providers for Mindflow. I am an athlete myself. I have played tennis since I was 9 years old and have competed my whole life, including playing in college, like yourselves. And I have experience working with people with various kinds of presenting issues, including struggles with body image and eating. And this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I struggled myself when I was younger with these issues and sought therapy for myself and found it very beneficial. So I'm hoping that the ideas and tools that I present today could be useful for you as well. So our three main objectives for my talk today. I'm going to describe 3 stages of how to increase your self-awareness and meet your own wants and needs through this concept called the contact cycle. And as I move through it, you'll see even more how this is connected to developing a healthier relationship with your body. And we'll identify 3 ways for you to challenge negative body talk, as well as identify 3 self-compassion strategies to aid your self-soothing, because I believe self-care and self-soothing is just so critical when we're talking about developing a healthier relationship with our bodies. So why is the mind-body connection important to our relationship with our bodies? Well, many of you may have heard of mindfulness or the mind-body connection, and it's so important that we understand that we're a whole unit, head to toe. And I talk about the mind-body connection with people all the time. So in Western culture, we're taught a lot actually to split off from our bodies and to live in our heads. And we need to rework this to know we are a full being. And negative body image is not just about appearance. And reconnecting with our emotions and our full self is just so important to combating negative body image. We are social creatures. What does this mean? Well, one, this means that we experience the impact of our interpersonal relationships and our interactions in our bodies, because this is where our sensations and emotions, let alone our thoughts, live. From the time we come into this world as babies, we feel physical sensations and emotions. In fact, way before we have verbal language. They're very powerful when we're first born. Our brains are not fully developed. It takes about 25 years for our brains to fully develop. So when we are first born, we are all sensation. And these sensations and emotional experiences get associated with our experiences with food, and they could be positive, negative, or neutral experiences depending on what happens in our families. Now, diet culture, as many of you may be aware, sends a lot of toxic messages about what we're supposed to look like, what we're supposed to eat. And if we include in this phenomena the fashion industry, the beauty industry, we're basically getting the message that we're supposed to question ourselves. And thus, we're learning to regulate our emotions through the lens of diet culture, through our relationship to food and negative body discourse. So today, I hope, is one part of challenging that. So when we're talking about negative body image, we are also tapping into our inner critic voice. And what is that? What's the inner critic voice? Well, it's that part of us that gives ourselves a hard time. And it's also connected to the experience of shame. And believe it or not, these are actually survival mechanisms that everybody has. As mammals, we are wired for survival. And there are various mechanisms that we have in our nervous system to help us survive. And the critic voice and shame are two of them. Well, shame tends to show up around age 2 to protect us from danger. And I love to use the hot stove example. So it's probably not in your full memory bank because at age 2, we don't have a whole lot of memories from that time. But you might, or maybe you've heard a story. Oh, you went to touch the hot stove and I had to swipe your hand away. Well, if this happened, because our body sensation, again, at age 2 is so great, it's greater than our reasoning skills. Mom or dad comes along and swipes the hand away or says, no, don't touch the hot stove. And they're really upset and scared for us. Or maybe it comes out as anger, and we might feel a flood of shame through our body and also get startled because we're shocked at the reaction. And the shame is what eventually will act as a protective mechanism because it's so powerful. It creates a memory, an association with the hot stove. Oh, I don't want to do that again, even if our hand never touched it, because we got told we did something wrong. Now, this connects to some of the early seeds of how we feel about ourselves and how we view ourselves. Because at that age, when we feel bad, our brain connects that to I am bad, or there's something wrong with me, because we don't have the reasoning skills yet to work through that it was just a behavior. So as we continue to get older, these shame associations can build over time. So now I'm going to introduce this concept I mentioned in the objectives called the contact cycle. First, I'm just going to explain what it is, and then I'll go into an example that I hope will bring it to life. So we are constantly trying to make good contact with ourselves and our environment, whether that's people in our lives or nature, every moment of every day. We can have multiple contact cycles throughout any given day. So when we are at the beginning of the cycle, let's say at pre-contact, our feelings, our thoughts initially are just coming into our awareness, and they start to grow. And this could be anything. And as our awareness grows, then we might start moving towards something, toward the thing we want to make contact with. And when we do make that contact and it's really satisfying, then that's that moment of like, oh, that feels so good. Like in a relationship, when we're connecting with somebody and we both feel felt and seen, it's so satisfying. Well, it's the same when we feel that way within ourselves. Now, post contact is just as important because this is the time we take in what we just did. And that helps us remember in the future, oh, yes, I did that before for myself. I can do it again. So now on to a very important example with the contact cycle. How do we meet a need, a very basic need like thirst? Well, in pre-contact, As soon as thirst starts to show up with awareness, it may start very, very small, and it has to build for us to notice it, like a dry mouth, right? I feel it a little bit right now. Maybe it's that nervousness showing up. And so I notice, oh, wow, I must be thirsty. My mouth is really dry. And then I wonder, am I dehydrated? Have I been drinking enough today? When did I last have a drink? You know what? I think I'll have a drink of water. Since I just told you I have a slightly dry mouth, I'm going to model for you quenching my thirst. So let's imagine I took a really satisfying gulp and I go, ah, now that is satisfying. Now I feel like my thirst is quenched. So as soon as I knew I wanted a drink, I shifted into the contact phase of the contact cycle. And I just had satisfying contact by taking a drink. And now in post contact, I say to myself, thank goodness I did that. I really needed that. I hesitated to take a moment to take a sip because I'm talking to you, but I wanted to take care of my thirst and demonstrate the cycle. And this is so important for our relationship with our bodies, right? The talk is really more than just about body image. I want to present a holistic view of taking care of ourselves. Um, Taking care of our needs, thirst, nourishment, rest are all so important. As athletes, you work really hard, you're studying also, you're trying to find balance. We need to take care of ourselves. So, this is just as important as to how we're talking to ourselves about our physical bodies. So, what is fat talk? Well, the language of fat refers to how we use the word fat to talk about our upsetting thoughts and feelings, like I feel fat. It isn't only about our bodies. Fat is not a feeling. First of all, I want this is really important. And you're probably aware of this, but I like to emphasize it because if we're engaging in fat talk, we're not necessarily thinking about the fact that fat isn't a feeling. It's not a sensation or an emotion. It's an adjective, a descriptive word that's full of judgment, and it's subjective. And it's connected to fat phobia. Fat phobia has been an acceptable bias in our society for decades. And that's how diet culture gets to thrive. Because whenever it was, like close to 100 years ago, that thinness started to be seen as the beauty ideal in our culture, it made space for this bias, and it's affected us ever since. We're taught to focus on the external and not on our internal experience, our emotions, our thoughts, and our values. Oops. So how do we change fat talk? Well, the contact cycle can also help us really reflect on what it means to be aware and then to work on making better contact with ourselves. So once we become aware we're engaging in fat talk, we can pause, we can slow down, maybe take a couple deep breaths and reflect on what is my genuine emotional or physical experience here. That's underneath the fat talk. Perhaps I'm worried I won't fit in. Maybe I feel sad today, or I feel unworthy, or I feel bloated because I just ate a big meal. And that's a physical sensation. And we're so trained by diet culture to even say, oh, I feel fat, just when we actually feel bloated. So, how do we change it? I'm showing you a page from one of my favorite books about body image, Life Doesn't Begin 5 Pounds from Now by Jessica Weiner. So you'll see we have two columns of words. On the left, we have fat talk words, lots of other negative, subjective judgments and that aren't about our emotions, right? So on the right side, we have a list of emotion words. So I just want you to take a moment as you're reading these lists to see if you relate to any of the things on there from either column. How do you talk to yourself? You might even notice under on the emotion list that there's some words we don't tend to think of as negative emotions. I'll talk more about emotions as a whole later, but we have a wide array of emotional experiences on this list. Well, I want to explain that fat talk, what it draws on is this metaphor about how big feelings might lead us to feel fat. And our culture feeds right into that. So imagine feeling heavy with emotion or full of emotion, even feeling excited. Depending on messages we got about feeling too excited, that might contribute to fat talk, feeling really big with emotion. Another way that fat talk shows up in our daily lives is in conversations. And if we are trying to be more aware of our own fat talk and to change it, it can feel really uncomfortable or frustrating when other people around us are also engaging in it. And maybe we want to try to shift the conversation. I really encourage people to speak up and see that they can influence what's happening, especially if we're with friends. So for healthy communication, I encourage the use of I statements where we really own our own experiences, our wishes, our needs. So here are a few examples of things you might work on saying to your peers or even at home with family. I would love to hear about how school is going instead of talking about dieting. Or I appreciate that dieting is important to you. However, it's not helpful for my well-being. I hope you understand that I'm asking for you not to talk about weight and dieting with me. Or I'd be happy to share my perspective on diet culture if you're interested. Otherwise, let's figure out another subject to talk about. I want you to reflect on what kind of talks do you want to have with the people in your life? What's enriching and meaningful to you other than talking about body image or diets? So, what is mindful self compassion? Mindful self compassion is basically learning how to show caring and compassion to ourselves. And this is not easy for most of us. In fact, it could be rather challenging. It stems from mindfulness overall. In the mindfulness perspective, we are taught to show compassion to others because pain and suffering unite all of us humans. And yet, it's usually the hardest to be kind to ourselves, and yet it's so important. And it's important when we're talking about our self-care and our relationships with our bodies. It's completely normal to want to avoid painful thoughts and feelings. It's not fun to be in touch with distress, and yet it's an important part of our experience. We may be taught not to show vulnerability. A lot of times we can get messages, and especially as athletes, that, oh, don't show your vulnerability. You want to show that you're strong, not weak. It's such an old school idea that vulnerability means weakness. Well, actually, vulnerability can be a great strength when we're sharing with someone our deeper emotions or thoughts or experiences. This is how we connect with people. This is how we are our authentic selves and develop relationships, including with ourselves. We're born with the innate ability to self-soothe. And, we cry when we're babies. We suck our thumbs. We, play with our fingers and toes. If you ever watched a baby in a crib, um, these are nonverbal ways that we know how to self-soothe without thinking about it. And yet we can get shamed as we get older for crying. We have tear ducts for a reason. When we're in physical or emotional distress, we can cry. It is a healthy self-soothing mechanism. So these messages get, all messed up, and we need to remember and learn sometimes that actually it's really healthy to be in touch with our vulnerability and thus to learn how to be self-compassionate. So I'm going to talk about now ways to do that. It's a practice. How do we learn self-compassion and continue to use it in our lives? Much like you guys practice every day, right? To get better at your sport. That's the only way we get better at things, is to keep practicing and make it a part of us. It's no different when we're working on our self-care. It's important to remember that the critic voice is only one part of our being. We have many parts of us, and we get to choose what to work on developing and what to focus on. So before assuming a thought or feeling is true, and I mentioned this a little earlier, I want you to remember, if negative self-talk shows up, what am I feeling under this feeling? Whether it's a feeling of the fat feeling or another self-critical thing. Am I under stress? Be curious, and I would add, also be gentle with yourselves. One way to help us learn to do this, because again, it can be quite challenging, is imagine, how would I talk with a friend in this situation? That often gives us just a little distance so we can be a little more objective about how to sound compassionate. I might think, if I want to show my friend that I care about them and what they're going through, I would say, I'm really sorry you're going through that. Or, that sounds so hard. Or, I'm here with you. I'm here for you. We can learn how to give ourselves these same compassionate thoughts. Another exercise that I think can be really helpful, and this has actually been researched, and is to place a hand over your heart and imagine that caring and warmth move through your palm into your heart space and through the rest of your body. The reason that this actually helps, or one of the reasons, is because we're wired to need physical comfort. It's another one of our survival mechanisms as mammals. So when we learn how to give it to ourselves, it's kind of like giving ourselves a little hug. We can even do that, give a little rub on the arm, like a little self-hug. So we can use various methods, including physical touch, to soothe our nervous system and to give ourselves caring. We can also use this method to send caring to specific areas of the body with which we're upset. Perhaps it's related to body image, or maybe you're feeling sore after a tough game or even injury. So this can be used in lots of ways to increase self-compassion. And similarly, a self-compassionate act is gratitude. And I say this because gratitude is so good for well-being and our mood and our outlook. It is an act of self-care. So we can send gratitude to parts of our bodies in a similar way, whether it's appreciating a part of ourselves that we just value for being healthy and strong. You can thank your lungs for helping you breathe out on the field, or your legs for running you across the court. And gratitude in general is such a helpful practice. Anything you're grateful at all. you could think about 3 things a day, no matter how small, that you're grateful for. Write them in a journal or just think about them, and it can help perk you up. You could be happy that the sun is shining brightly and it's a little warmer outside. We can be happy to have a nice interaction with an important person in our lives. These are all ways to help build the practice of self-care and self-compassion. So in closing, I want to emphasize that as we work on developing a healthy relationship with our bodies, we can work on embracing our emotions. Emotions are our teachers and our friends. We're born with them. We don't make them up. They're there for a reason. They're trying to teach us about our experience. And when we embrace our emotions, we get to know our full, authentic selves, which then also leads to us being able to better express ourselves to people in our lives. And there's not much more important than feeling seen and understood by other people, as well as understanding and caring about ourselves. One of my favorite self-help gurus, Brene Brown, she shares that we can't selectively numb our feelings. If we numb pain, then we numb joy. And I just love this because it reinforces this idea that to be our fullest, healthiest selves and have a healthy relationship with our whole body, we need to embrace the full range of emotional experience. So, learning to cope with our feelings and thoughts in direct and healthy ways instead of focusing on superficial things like body image or our appearance in a negative way, especially, um, will help us be our full authentic selves. So I hope that this information is helpful, and keep working on using your authentic voice and practicing healthy stress management and self-compassion. And I believe this will help you develop a healthy relationship with your body. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And now, Anthony, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Cindy. That was incredible, by the way. For those of you who weren't here when we initially kicked things off, we have a Q&A session. So we've got a couple questions that we're going to get to, but if you have one, please feel free to submit it into the chat. You can do so anonymously. Like I mentioned, we find that people who ask questions, chances are other attendees have the same questions, and it really seems to spur on great conversation. So we'll start with the first one we have. Cindy, when you have a coach that makes a negative comment about your
Mm.
body, where do you go from there?
Oh, yes, that could be very challenging. And I've actually had a couple clients bring this up to me. I mean, ideally, it would be great that you feel safe enough with this coach to tell them. Now, in the moment, that might be really hard, and that would be understandable because that could really catch you off guard. So I would want you to think about, if you don't feel comfortable talking to your coach about how the comment made you feel uncomfortable, who else is a safe person to go to? Is there another coach on the team, a trainer that you could talk to about the situation to get support? I wouldn't want you to be alone with that. I would want you to get support. Do you want to start by sharing with a teammate or a good friend? I want you to be heard with those feelings. Now, again, hopefully you could eventually come back to the coach. Now, if you don't want to be alone with the person and you want someone else there for support, that would be completely understandable. Because again, I would want you to be heard and seen for how you're feeling.
Absolutely. Really good guidance. We've got another question. And again, if you have one, please feel free to submit it. But if this is the last one, that is totally fine as well. So in this day and age with social media, how do you handle the pressures that I feel when it comes to my body image? Really
Oh
good
boy.
question, by the way.
Yes, very, very important. Um, I mean, sometimes it astounds me how young people deal with social media in this day and age, something that I didn't have to deal with growing up. And there is so much out there, and it can be really hard to navigate it. To anybody, maybe I'm asking like you're going to answer me. Sorry, I forget sometimes that you're just listening. But I've had clients talk about doing a social media cleanse where they really think about mindfully what they're consuming. Who are you following? What are the things that you pay attention to? It may be really important to go through your feeds and think about, is this benefiting you? Is this healthy? Now, there are some influencers out there. Some have really good intentions, not necessarily helpful information. Um, and it's hard to wade through that, but I would really want you to think, is anything triggering? And remove those things that are. Take a break from them. Maybe even take social media breaks at times too. So let's be thoughtful about what we're digesting. And with the scrolling, the mindless scrolling, I think it's very important to pay attention to that and slow down. When we're just flipping rapidly through information, we don't always know how it's affecting us. When I was younger, they started doing studies about beauty magazines and the impact flipping through beauty magazines would have on girls and women. Just looking at the advertisements and the models, nowadays we're not just dealing with photoshopping, we're dealing with filters. We don't even know if what we are seeing is real. So it can be very confusing and misleading and sometimes triggering. So I really encourage a lot of mindfulness about what you're looking at.